Good afternoon, my friends. This is Paul, and today's episode of ISTJ Info Dumping is brought to you by a very special guest. This time, this video was requested by Let Freedom Ring, who is a fellow ISTJ. When I get a request from my own kind, seeing as we are basically extinct on YouTube, I of course want to take that opportunity. Not literally take it, because the Bible says not to steal. Let Freedom Ring asked me if I could talk about the contentious relationship that ISTJs have with their inferior extroverted intuition and how we both love it, but yet we also can't stand it. And maybe also advice on what to do to act more like our ENFP and ENTP brethren. So what is extroverted intuition for those of you that might be new? Extroverted intuition is a function that all of the NPs and SJs have. And it's a function that generally prefers to speculate on new, exciting external possibilities and ideas. It doesn't like to think deeper about one's own internal goals, but it likes to think, ooh, this and this and this. It all connects to form something wonderful. But it's like usually very silly and out of nowhere. Usually you would describe extroverted intuitives as having a much more witty, much more funny, childish side than an introverted intuitive would. Not saying they can't, but there's usually a certain vibe they give off that it's very forced humor, and it's usually very, like, they're trying to make people laugh, but you know it doesn't come naturally. Whereas extroverted intuitives, oh gosh, they are the life and soul of the party if you get them started, especially the ENFPs, where they just blurt out their ideas and their feelings like it's a volcano. But ISTJs and ISFJs are particularly notorious in not liking to embrace this side of themselves because extroverted intuition is in the fourth spot for ISTJs and ISFJs, because that means that they have a reluctance to try new things. They have a reluctance to be creative and to want to innovate and try something new because their dominant function, introverted sensing, is all about recalling personal experiences in the past and using them to contrast with the present to be able to see how things have changed, and also just as a reference point to make sure that they're comfortable, that they're safe, and that they keep to their routine so that something horrible and new and disastrous doesn't happen. ISTJs are typically pessimists when it comes to the future, myself included. We don't like to think about what could be because for us, when we try to think about the future, it's always worst case scenario. We think, what if a house? What if a tree falls on our house? What if a tornado hits? What if Jesus comes tomorrow and we can't make any future plans because the second coming will ruin all of those plans, assuming you're the type that believes that Jesus will come, take everyone up to heaven, and it'll be a one and done trip, and not that he will stay on earth and establish his kingdom. But the Catholic Church doesn't have a definitive answer on that, so I'll leave that up to you to interpret. What is clear, though, is that ISTJs, unlike the INFJs and INTJs, where they lead with introverted intuition, ISTJs and ISFJs have that as their eighth function. So thinking about new possibilities, thinking about the future is very hard for them. However, extroverted intuition is still in the top four, and most Myers-Briggs efforts really only talk about the top four functions when they talk about the function stack. So obviously, ISTJs use it to a certain degree, but how do they use it in a healthy way where they actually like it? Well, I can give you a few examples for me. First of all, I am a ridiculously funny person. At least I like to think so. Some of the introverted intuitives cringe at some of my jokes. But I'd like to think that I can make almost anyone laugh because I can always find a new and exciting way to approach life. For example, when I'm at my work, sometimes if I'm really appreciating my boss for hiring me and actually giving me a job during this tough time, I might like take an existing Bible verse and like change the wording around so that it sounds like I'm referring to her instead of Jesus. Like, for example, I would take that incredible verse in the Gospel of John where it says, "For God so loved the world," and change it to, "For God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten daughter so that Paul may not be jobless but have eternal money." Obviously, I'm not trying to say that my boss is better than God. It's just a joke, and if people can't take it as a joke, that's their problem. And she loves it. It always cracks her up every single time. And whenever people come to me, they like to know how I can take something familiar and try to find a unique spin on it. Coupled with our introverted feeling, ISTJs usually have a very strong sense of personal identity. They don't like to go along with the crowd. They do not often succumb to peer pressure or mob mentality, instead being very thankful that they are unique individuals. Not as much as the FP types where they go so crazy about their individuality that I don't even want to discuss that stuff. ISTJs often thrive on not only being creative, but on being unique and being true to themselves. So that's why most ISTJs don't like it when people lie, not even white lies. They want to always tell the 100% authentic truth, and they expect that from others. In fact, I would say that generally speaking, most types kind of like to project their top four functions onto others as the way that I see my functions, this is how I expect others to be. I don't have any proof that the other types do that, but I do have proof that I do it because I wish that other types could have better memories. I wish that other types would think more logically and actually look at the statistics before jumping into a solution. I wish all of the other types were more authentic and true to themselves, and I wish people would be more creative and not try to just go with the tried and true. But yet that runs into a bit of a contradiction in what you might know about ISTJs. We're very traditional oriented people. You might not believe it with the way that I talk, but if you look at my very earliest videos on my channel, you'll notice that they almost always have pretty much exactly the same format. I still say, good afternoon, everyone, this is Paul. Maybe a little bit different, but for the most part, pretty much unchanged. My video game reviews, yes, they have better editing and they have stupid motorcycles, and they have like a capture card so I can show footage and audio tracks, but I still more or less use the same mental template. If I were truly an extroverted intuitive, I wouldn't keep to that structure for so long. I would want to innovate and find a creative way to talk about each video game. But yet you still see that creativity come out in other ways. You'll definitely see it in full force in my upcoming Best Games of 2023 video. And when I've shared with you some of the things I put in my novels, one of the comments that I got the most in that video was, oh my gosh, Paul, those are really creative ideas. So obviously ISTJs are not opposed to creativity and being unique. They just don't want to use it at the expense of their comfort. Usually, if an ISTJ is going to try something new or be open to a new experience, they have to know all of the logistics of it first so that it can be a predictable outcome. For instance, when I went to go visit Isabel last year, this was something I was super excited for, but boy did I want to know as many details as possible. I wanted to know what our itinerary was, I wanted to know what the hotel was like, I wanted to know how long it would take, when we would have to get up, if I would be able to have a shower. If there was any part of the trip that was ambiguous, it stressed me out. Not saying that she stressed me out or the people involved in the trip stressed me out, but the mere idea of going against the familiar was just something I did not want to do, and if it was even suggested that I try it, I got deeply uncomfortable. For example, my friend Teresa came along with me on the trip, and she's an ESFP, so she doesn't have extroverted intuition, but her extroverted sensing has kind of a similar function in that it likes tangible experiences. So she would always see these new exotic restaurants that were around where Isabel lived, but not where we lived. And so she would say, ooh, that sounds cool, let's go and try it. And Isabel would say, yeah, I'd love to introduce you to some new culture. And I would say, no, give me Burger King. And I know it sounds super selfish and petty, but I also don't want to lie and say, yeah, sure, I'll go along with you guys, even though it's probably going to be a disaster, because that would go against my personal authenticity and not liking to tell lies. We eventually came to a compromise where I ate breakfast at McDonald's, they ate breakfast at that Thai restaurant, and I just got a cup of water, so that we were all able to eat and go to different restaurants. I just didn't have to eat at the same place they did. Generally speaking, the push and pull that ISTJs experience is that they don't want to be like everyone else, but they also don't want to be uncomfortable. They like to know when and where and how things will play out. And then once they feel safe, then they're willing to show off their silly and goofy side. Most people who talk about ISTJs will often make videos somewhere along the line of ISTJs, you're secretly really funny and really goofy. But why is it a secret? Like ENFPs and ENTPs are constantly goofy and funny. Like they have no problem whatsoever just pumping out the most random thing ever. Like for instance, when my friend Danielle came over, she's an ENFP, and when I was explaining the function stack to her, I said, well, ISTJs and ENFPs have their function stacks reversed. So same functions but in opposite order, so it makes us kind of like mirrors. So then she started moving her hands around. She said, Paul, can you mimic my hand motions? Because that's just like a mirror. And so I was like, oh, okay, then that might be fun to imitate. And then she said, now you start. And I just hung my head in embarrassment trying to hold in my laughter. Because the inferior function is also sometimes called the embarrassment function, where when you actually do use it, you're like, oh, this is really making me uneasy here. So, for example, an ENTJ is going to get really uncomfortable when he or she has to share their feelings because they're so much about efficiency and practicality that the idea of being squishy and vulnerable just scares them to death. So, in the same way, ISTJs are afraid of trying something new because they're afraid that it might lead to a bad outcome because they've observed how things worked in the past, and in the past things worked well, so they want to preserve it. So how do you get ISTJs to go from secretly being goofy and funny and the craziest person in the room to actually being funny and goofy and the craziest person in the room? Patience and getting to know them. Usually ISTJs are reserved people, so while it's true that they do have a side to them that is actually very touchy-feely, very emotional, and also very goofy and silly, they reserve when they show that to when they feel safe, which also ties into social interactions. If they don't feel safe with you, that side of them is probably going to be suppressed in favor of more statistics, familiarity, routine, schedule, objective truth. There's not going to be a whole lot of personal emotion that is put into that conversation. I would say that the best way to get to know an ISTJ is to have the expectation that your relationship is going to start out slow, and the ISTJ might come across as a little bit rude at first, but it's because they are trying to make sure that these past familiar patterns are not being overwritten. So they might at first be reluctant to be friends with you on Facebook because they might think, in the past, the last time I tried to be friends with someone on Facebook when I had just met them, this happened. And they can recall it with such clarity, and it paralyzes them so much that they don't want to take that risk again. So in order for them to be more open to sharing their easygoing, silly side, you have to be willing to know what happened in their past and show them tangible results because they have extroverted thinking. They want results. They want things to actually get done. Show them some kind of tangible reason for them to have zero doubt whatsoever that you are going to be different and that you are going to keep them comfortable so that they can be open to trying something different. One example that I usually think is a pretty good one for the high intuitive types is to take a lawyer. A lawyer's job is to sift through the evidence in a case, and the evidence will therefore eliminate certain possibilities because objective logic dictates that something can't be contradictory. So if there's evidence that a person's fingerprints were on a weapon, then that would therefore prove that the person touched the weapon. So if the other person's fingerprints wouldn't be on it, then the only logical course of action is either the person was wearing gloves, they wiped off the fingerprints, or they didn't touch the weapon to begin with. That's probably a lame example. I play too much Phoenix Wright. I think on the simpler side as far as lawyer stuff. But the point still stands is that evidence is very much an extroverted thinking thing to do. It's not internal logic. It's not the person coming to their own conclusions about how the case went. It's looking at the empirical, objective, physical data and making a judgment from there. That's how ISTJs like to operate. It is probably very hard for most of you to envision how that can be possible when something like trust is much more of a feeling than something tangible. So that's where if you don't have something that's physical and that you can actually touch, then use results. Think of some kind of end goal that the ISTJ can't deny. I don't know. Here's an example that I can think of off the top of my head that would make me probably be more willing to trust someone. There's this stigma in American society, don't know if this is the case for the rest of the world, but at least in America I can attest to it, is that men are much more likely to be creeps and pedophiles and perverts. And so one of my biggest fears as a male is the thought that if I so much as look at a child, then that person or the parent is automatically going to assume that I'm having these terrible, evil thoughts. So that's why I'm afraid to go to the lake anymore by myself, because I'm afraid that if there's a lot of kids there, then people are going to be thinking I want to do something to them. And if there's a lot of women there, and if I happen to look at them in a swimsuit, because heaven forbid eyes wander at the pool, then I'm automatically thinking these sexual dirty things. So I really like it when women come around and assure me that not only are they not like that, but then they start listing anatomical facts that might prove that the male gaze is something that is inherently natural and not something that is a sign of perversion, but rather as a sign that the male is naturally drawn to the person that he needs to procreate with, because God designed male and female to have babies, at least inherently. Obviously there are complications, but generally speaking, the very first commandment God gave was be fruitful and multiply. So if people can quote those kinds of Bible verses, then I can say, oh, okay, so if it's objectively logically proven that this inherent desire to look at something beautiful is not perverted, and then they produce statistics that show what perversion actually is, what is the concrete definition of it, and say, here are all the ways in which you are not a pervert. Here are some speech patterns that prove it. That makes my day, and that makes me feel more comfortable being my own gender in public, especially around that person, especially if that person is female and is willing to trust males. That's why I love hangouts where we can go swimming, because not only did I used to have a fear of the water, because of various traumatic things in the past, but also because I had that mindset that every time a male looked at a woman in a swimsuit, that he was automatically assumed that he was creepy or perverted. So if one of my female friends is willing to be in a swimsuit and not have body language that appears closed off and protected, then I'll say, oh, the fact that you're looking and acting comfortable shows that that is not what you're thinking. Therefore, your actions and your body language and what you're wearing is consistent with your words. Therefore, I'm more willing to trust you. That's an extreme example. Probably I was thinking of putting that in another video, but it's so relevant here I figured I'd ask. So, bottom line, give ISTJs a reason with their extroverted thinking and their introverted sensing to come to trust, and then you will see the side of them that's more willing to dump out their feelings and their emotions, and then you'll even more so be willing to see the side of them that's willing to be goofy and silly and show off their creativity, because ISTJs make for amazing songwriters and novelists and screenwriters because they have these cool ideas They just don't want to risk their comfort to show them. So with that, thank you very much for watching. Let me know down in the comments if this helped you to get to know ISTJs more, if this helped you to get to know men more. I don't know. I think there needs to be more people out there that are willing to talk about male issues that are besides just the obvious external factors. So might as well incorporate it into an info dumping video. Special thanks to my patrons Matthew Rakowski, Spoon Ghost, and Splatcat for contributing to me not being in financial disparity, if that's a word. And yeah, just let me know in the comments what you think of the video. Try to be as detailed as possible. Take a hint from Let Freedom Ring's comments where they're like really long and really in depth. I don't mind long comments. Bring them on because I want to know how to improve. So with that being said, I hope you all have a wonderful day. And until the next time, remember to keep the faith, stay epic, and God bless. Bye.